Alright, good afternoon everyone. Thanks very much for giving up your lunchtime to come and listen to me walk on for a few minutes. Today I'm going to be talking about the commercialisation of football, and what I'll be kind of talking about under this is how effectively football has become almost more of a business than a sport, and the different figures associated with that, and kind of how this has come about and the reasons for it. So,
Belvo.
Okay, so So the context I have here is just the way that the world transfer record has progressed over the years. So in 1982, the world transfer record was at £3 million when Diego Maradona moved to Barcelona. In 1996, it was up at £15 million for Alan Shearer moving to Newcastle. In the 2000s, it changed twice, both for moves to Real Madrid, and by 2013, it was up as high as £86 million. Last year, Paul Pogba moved to Man United for £89 million. And then just last summer,
sorry, I'm trying to be that.
And just last summer, Neymar moved to PSG from Barcelona for £198 million. Now, as you can see, the rise is fairly gradual until this year, when the rise went up a huge amount. And this is more down to the wealth behind the PSG ownership and their determination to sign Neymar from Barcelona. But you can see the amount of money that's being pumped into these transfers is just incredible, and the way it's progressed over time is quite fascinating. So looking at the figures for inflation, if Diego Maradona were to do his world record transfer move nowadays, it would cost around £9.9 million, whereas the current world transfer record is nearly 200 million higher than that, at £198 million. So this shows there's a huge gap between not only how much they cost in the past and how much they cost now, but even adjusted for inflation, there's a huge gap between how much footballers would have cost in the 1980s and how much they cost now. So what I'm going to do during this talk is kind of analyse where this money's coming from and how we've reached a point where this is how much money is being pumped into football. Okay, so I'm going to be looking at British and specifically English football, because I feel like this is the best example, and it's one where you can kind of look at it the clearest and see all the different figures clearest. So the context of this is the 1980s in English football. So there was a bit of a monopoly in the 1980s. Only two clubs were really winning the Premier League, or the First Division. It was Everton and Liverpool were just constantly trading the title between them. But there was a lot of success in Europe. The English clubs won about 7 European Cups during this time. But this was against a background where there were lots of tragedies happening in football. There were crushes in the Heysel Stadium in Brussels at the European Cup final, and in Hillsborough in an FA Cup semi-final. And the one in Heysel led to English clubs being banned from European competition for 5 years. So there was a bit of a problem here in that there was very little variety to the teams that were winning the league, and also there was no chance for them to compete in Europe. So one of the major problems with Everton and Liverpool winning all the leagues is that there was a lack of the traditional powerhouses up the top of the league. Teams like Leeds and Manchester United and Spurs and Arsenal, who had won league titles in the past, lots of them were struggling. There was a lack of interest in games on television, and the rates at which people were watching games on television was going down rapidly. But this started to change at the end of the 1980s. Arsenal won 2 leagues in 3 years, and then the year after that Leeds won. So the powerhouses were starting to return to the top of the table. And around this time, a similar change started to happen with the economics of the sport. So in 1992, the Premier League was invented. There was a meeting of FA officials in Lancaster Gate, and they decided to form a breakaway league. And the top clubs were allowed to form a sort of Premier League on the condition that they cut it down from 22 clubs to 20. The TV rights were sold at a premium, and this was to allow clubs to have enough money to buy in the best players into the English league. It was a brainchild of the big 5 in England: Arsenal, Everton, Liverpool, United and Spurs, who said, well, we're earning the most money and we're spending the most money, so we have a right to separate ourselves from the rest of the football system. There was sponsorship from curling, and they brought in logos and branding, something that had never really been done for the First Division. So this was the first example of a real revolutionary change in the way football was being approached. This was a change, and the main thing that went in hand with this was the introduction of Sky Sports. So with this new deal, broadcasting was going to be the key player. ITV were the favourites for the rights because they'd been broadcasting football for about 10 years previously to this. But suddenly the Sky company, owned by Rupert Murdoch, offered around £304 million over 5 years. Now, in context, that doesn't sound like a lot nowadays, but in the 1990s, that was a lot of money to pay just to broadcast football on television. This meant that there was a move away from showing it free-to-air, because Sky's programme would be entirely satellite, and it would mean dedicated channels per sport. They had a major marketing push with things such as Super Sunday, Monday Night Football, things we still have today. But football had never been presented in this way as kind of a show in the American style. BBC did keep the rights to show highlights free-to-air, so there was a little bit of the free-to-air nature still there, with Match of the Day still around. But this was showing that football was starting to become a bit of a show, and you could see this very clearly in the early years of the Premier League. So one of the major models that it was based on was the NFL in the United States, even kind of stealing the name for their TV shows like the Monday Night Football, which was broadcast on ABC. There's a huge marketing push. They brought in big names from the world of football to analyse these games and to bring expert opinion. Some were unhappy because there were no longer games on free-to-air television, and the kind of traditional nature of football, where you could sit around and watch it on BBC on a Saturday afternoon and then catch the highlights of the rest of the games and Match of the Day, it wasn't quite the same now. You had to pay a premium to watch the games. The first two Premier League titles were won by Manchester United, so again, this is an example of, again, the traditional powerhouses were starting to return to the top. Now this went hand in hand with another major change, because in 1991, there was the first multi-millionaire to buy a football club. Jack Walker bought Blackburn Rovers. Now he was an entrepreneur from the steel industry in England, and he had a personal wealth of around £600 million. Now someone like this had never owned a football club before. There had never been any example of someone like this having any interest in football clubs, let alone buying them. He bought in the best players and broke the British transfer record twice to sign Chris Sutton from Norwich and Alan Shearer from Newcastle. He renovated the stadium. He was quoted as saying he wanted to make clubs like Manchester United look cheap, and he brought in big names like Kenny Dalglish as manager, and this eventually led to Blackburn Rovers winning the Premier League in 1995. So English football was starting now to become a bit more of a business. You can see now that there was an interest from people like Jack Walker, because there was an increased marketability to it. If you can be seen to be making a lot of money from this, then you're going to be interested in coming in if you are a businessman. Another example of this was Roman Abramovich buying Chelsea in 2003. They then won 2 league titles. The Glazers bought Manchester United in 2005, and they ended up winning another 5 league titles. The Abu Dhabi Group bought Man City, and they led on to winning 2 more titles. John W. Henry bought Liverpool. Nothing's really happened there. It's just another example of a millionaire buying a football club. So you can see there's a huge list of people who have shown an interest in buying these football clubs, because it's been proven that if you invest in people, you'll get the money out of it. There's been a kind of a mantra with these people that if you can't beat them, you buy them. And the best example of this is in 2004, Chelsea were knocked out of the Champions League by Porto. So the next year they hired Porto's manager, Jose Mourinho, to take over, and within 2 years they'd won 2 league titles. So I suppose what this is building to is looking at how much football clubs are worth nowadays. According to Forbes and various other websites and research, Manchester United are the most valuable football club in the world at the moment. They have an estimated worth of around $1.17 billion worldwide. They have an operating income of nearly £200 million per year, and a lot of their money is coming in through sponsorship deals. They get £75 million per year from Adidas, who are making their shirts, and £53 million per year from Chevrolet, who are sponsoring their jerseys. Now, if you just take those numbers into consideration for a moment, it's amazing to see that this amount of money is coming in purely from the jerseys. And the fact that shirt sales are predicted to bring in about £1.5 billion by the time their deal with Adidas is over. The sheer amount of money being brought into football clubs nowadays is just incredible compared to where we were during the 1980s, when players were worth only around £3 million, and now you see these insane amounts of money coming into clubs. It's almost hard to comprehend. So I suppose the question I'm asking with this is, where is football going to go next? Well, the TV rights certainly are showing no sign of slowing down. And Sky Sports and BT Sport together are paying a total of around £5.1 billion just to broadcast the Premier League in England for the next 3 years. And a big example of how the amount of money in football isn't getting smaller, it's actually still increasing rapidly. So in 2014, Cardiff finished bottom of the Premier League and were given more prize money than Manchester United were for winning the league the previous year. So this is just an example of how the amount of money in football is just reaching incredible levels. There are concerns over the gaps between clubs and the increasing prices. The International Players Association are starting to take on FIFA and say, well, things like Neymar moving for nearly 200 million isn't quite right. And the gap between bigger and smaller clubs, it is getting bigger. The wealth of bigger clubs and things like the Premier League and Champions League is becoming almost impossible to battle with if you're a smaller club. And just recently we've seen the Premier League continue their marketing drive by dropping their title sponsor and bringing in branding and logos and such. So it's amazing to see how football has progressed. At the start of the 1980s, football was just a game that was played in England for pleasure. There was very little marketing behind it, there was very little money to be made in it. And very quickly at the start of the 1990s, lots of business decisions were made which completely changed the direction football has gone in. So that's just a little history of it, and we're asking the question of where football is going next.